Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to give an update about risk across the crypto market. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter, where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. But before I get to that, what I want to do is give a little bit of an update about some developments that we have here on the channel. So if you've seen the video that we put out earlier today with our discussion, our collaboration discussion with Jay from Daily Crypto Analysis, one of the things we announced in that video was that we are working together to put out a website. So kind of a joint website between Upside Down Data and DCA, where we'll be hosting live data from the Upside Downside Potential Indicator, the DCA Risk Index, as well as our Trend Confidence Indicator and the Momentum Bias Indicator. So that's something that we're currently working on. But it's going to take a little bit of time for us to get that all worked out. So one of the things that we're thinking about is ways that we could get UDPI data to folks earlier than that. So one of the things that we've wanted to do for a little bit here on the channel, was find out more about feedback from the community about our content, right? Are you enjoying what we're putting out? Are there certain things you'd like to see more of? Maybe things you might want to see less of, etc. And we're also curious about what you think about the website. What kind of features would you like? What kind of data would you be interested in seeing on there? All those kind of things. So what we decided to do was put together a short survey where we're just basically going to ask for feedback, about the content we're putting out, as well as things you might like to see on the website. And then kind of as a result of that, if you go ahead and fill out the survey, we'll then send you a link that had to a kind of simple Google Sheets kind of page that has live Bitcoin and Ethereum UDPI data on it across the 3 different time frames. So I'm showing you here the tweet that we put out about this. I'll put this link to the survey in the description of this video. So all you gotta do is fill that out, and then we'll go ahead and email you that link to that sheet. And then that'll be just 2 months of free access to that Bitcoin and Ethereum upside downside potential indicator data. So go ahead and check that out in the survey. We'll definitely appreciate the feedback. And that's a great way of getting access to this data early before the website is completed. All right, let's go ahead and talk about risk. So I want to start off by talking about Bitcoin across the different time frames that we tend to follow. So long term, medium term, and short term. So in the long term, the model is still overall bullish on Bitcoin, right? Sitting at around -2, basically. So in the long term, it thinks there's more upside than downside potential that's realistic for Bitcoin. Now, in the medium term and the short term, you can see this is actually more undecided, right? So it is in the negative for both of them, so -0.82, -0.63. But really, kind of in the medium term and the short term, it thinks that it's roughly equal upside versus downside that's plausible, maybe slightly biased to the bullish side, but certainly downside from here could be plausible in especially the short term. And so that's something that the way that I'm kind of interpreting this, right, is that I do think that in the long term, most likely in hindsight, this will have looked like a good accumulation zone for Bitcoin, but that doesn't mean that we're exempt from any possibility of short-term pain, right? There's plenty of possibility for short-term pain, but really that might just be kind of all within some kind of general, broader kind of accumulation zone for Bitcoin before maybe it's able to start moving back up. Now, not financial advice, just my take on that, but that's the way that I'm interpreting this data. And the same for Ethereum as well. Now, with Ethereum, it's interesting because we really kind of rallied up recently and kind of gotten up a little bit overextended at 2. We've now been kind of correcting off of that in risk in the short term. We're still a little bit above 0, but we're coming off of that now. And so I see this as good news for Ethereum, certainly in the short term, right? Being up at 2 was unlikely for for Ethereum to do something too incredibly impressive in these very bearish conditions, sitting up at a 2 in the short term. And so the fact that it's kind of cooling off is, I think, good news that maybe upside could follow. But again, like Bitcoin, it's giving the same kind of pattern where bullish long term, more undecided short term. So there's the possibility of more short term pain before some of this longer term upside potential could get realized. So again, I do think for Ethereum, this will more likely than not look like just a macro accumulation zone that will look good in hindsight. But again, that's the longer term outlook, that there could be some shorter term pain that has to happen before we get there. Just my interpretation there. So to talk about altcoins, we have kind of similar stories for these as well. Where in the long-term UDPIs, really Phantom and Atom are the only two that are above zero and only just barely so. The rest are all negative. And I've spoken before about, how I am interpreting these, that as long as Bitcoin is doing poorly, I take altcoins with a bit of a grain of salt, right? Even if they are quite low on their UDPI levels in the long term, doesn't mean that the bottom's in necessarily yet. Because again, if Bitcoin drops lower, altcoins are going to follow it. There's very unlikely for any altcoin to rally while Bitcoin is dumping. Just very unlikely for that to happen. And also for assets that have only existed in a bull market, we have to remember that the UDPI has not seen them yet in a bear market. So you just have to take that as a caveat. So Kusama, for example, only having existed in a bull market, the fact that it's down here at -5, this is, it's the lowest risk in Kusama's history. But if we're about to go into a bear market, then the model is going to be learning new things about Kusama it's never known before, because Kusama's only existed in a bull market. So just keep that in mind when you're interpreting this, that younger assets that have never experienced a bear market, you might want to just be a little bit cautious about being too overly eager to hop into them while they're still falling, for example, because when you're catching an altcoin as a falling knife, it tends to hurt more something like Bitcoin. With the Bitcoin long-term UDPIs, or really any of those UDPIs for Bitcoin or Ethereum, I'm a lot more confident in those because the model has seen how those assets behave in bear markets, especially Bitcoin having gone through multiple bull and bear phases. The model is pretty well, has a lot of knowledge about Bitcoin at this point, so it knows what to expect. Whereas with these younger altcoins, it hasn't seen the full-on bear markets for them yet, so it's not quite as knowledgeable about them as it would be for an older asset. So just something to keep in mind with these. But again, overall, largely in the negatives. And for the assets that, if we are going into a bear market, it's still probably going to be the case that for a lot of these, this would have been a good accumulation zone for any ultimate pump out of the bear market. But you have to keep in mind that some of these assets might not survive a bear market. So that's another caveat you have to keep in mind. So medium term, similar story. Actually, I think they're all in the negative. All of the assets we're monitoring are in the negative. So in the coming weeks, sees more upside than downside. But again, doesn't preclude that downside from occurring. And the short term, we're again seeing indecision, or kind of leaning bullish. But again, with this, the main thing to be watching is going to be Bitcoin, right? Really, for me, it's once Bitcoin starts to look healthy again, is when I'm going to start putting a lot more stock into looking at the upside on these altcoins, right? Once it's more clear the bottom's in, that's when I'd see this upside being a lot more in play, kind of across these different time frames for altcoins. And I've talked about this before with altcoins. Sometimes it can even be prudent in bearish times to maybe shift your frame of reference, instead of zero being that kind of balance between that kind of neutral risk reward perspective. Maybe you shift down to -2, maybe even -3 for altcoins as that kind of cutoff point for a neutral risk reward. Because again, while Bitcoin's bearish, the downside tends to be a lot more in play for altcoins than the upside. So of course, not financial advice. You should make your own decisions, but that's just the way I'm looking at it. That for Bitcoin and Ethereum, I'm relatively confident that in the long term, this will probably have looked like a good accumulation zone. For altcoins, I'm not quite as confident about that yet, just because altcoins can get pretty wrecked during a bear market. Now, that's not to say that we are going into a bear market. I don't know, to be completely honest, right? We could be going into a bear market, or we could rally from here if broader macro conditions allow for it. That certainly is possible. And so, with Bitcoin, I have a lot more confidence. With altcoins, I feel like I'm going to need to see the broader conditions turn around a bit before I'm more confident that they're going to be able to start quickly realizing some of this upside potential. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. And remember to go check out that survey. We're really curious to get your feedback.